Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and the lighting is getting a little bit better, but it's generally still functionally inept. Kind of like Luke in some of the more recent Zahn novels, except for Scoundrels, which we're going to reference here again in just a moment. I am your host, of course, Nathan P. Butler of Star Wars Beyond the Films, the podcast, StarWarsFanWars.com, the Star Wars Timeline Gold, Republic Forces Radio Network, etc., etc., etc. We're continuing on with our look at the Star Wars EU publications in approximate publication order. In our last episode, we were at February 1978, taking a look at Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the first EU novel. In it, you may recall I mentioned how Leia did not know how to swim, and yet Luke did. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense with Tatooine unless they have some kind of indoor pools somewhere that we haven't seen very much about. Well, this time, we have a continuation of the episode prior to that, where we looked at the Marvel series and left off with issue 10. This time we're covering issues 11 through 15, but we also have our first blatant expanded universe novel versus comic continuity contradiction. Oh joy. Now, when we left off with the Marvel series, Han and Chewie had gotten their reward from the Rebel Alliance, left Yavin 4 only to wind up running into Crimson Jack, the pirate who jacked them and stole their bounty. Now, this is kind of cool because we find that this is a reference in the soon-to-be-released, currently only available as an uncorrected proofs advanced reader copy, or advanced reviewer copy, Star Wars Scoundrels by Timothy Zahn, which is actually quite good. Much more like the Bantam era Zahn than the Del Rey era Zahn, but I digress. Now, that sets up that story and others, where Han has to now find loot again to pay back Jabba the Hutt, and apparently is unable to do that by the time of The Empire Strikes Back. Otherwise, he would have, and he wouldn't have had to leave the Rebel Alliance, and so on. So when we last left, he had that stolen from him, wound up going to Aduba 3, he and Chewie, and they took an odd job trying to stop Sergi X Arrogantis with other individuals like Don Juan Quixote and Jim the Starkiller Kid, and Jackson, the, big old green rabbit man, and after doing so, have left. Now, amid that story, there were a few little cutaways to what is going on with Luke and Leia at the time. Luke had gone out on a scouting mission with the droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO, to try to find a new Rebel base, knowing that the Empire now knows about Yavin 4 as the Rebel base, thanks to A New Hope. When Luke isn't heard from for a while, we saw Leia take off and go looking for him. At the very end of the last of our previous issues, number 10, we saw Luke and the droids on a planet where they were being attacked by essentially a giant sea serpent type creature. And that is where the next arc of that comic series picks up, which is essentially an end to sort of a double arc that started back in issue number 7. This new arc includes issue number 11, entitled, I kid you not, Star Search. Ed McMahon's got to be on there somewhere. It says again, R2, 3PO, into the ship. My blaster's not stopping this thing. But Master Luke, the ship is sinking. That actually at least sort of fits what's happening in the issue. And in the corner, this issue, the fate of Luke Skywalker, in case you remember that he was going off on a mission and was missing in the previous ones amid all the different Han and Chewie stuff. Issue number 12. Entitled Doom World. That's actually the issue that gives the Dark Horse Comics Classic Star Wars a Long Time Ago Volume 1 trade paperback its name. Doom World. Luke and the droids trapped on a Doom World. We want those robots, boy! And that lightsaber can't stop all of us. Notice that lightsaber is finally spelled correctly S-A-B-E-R instead of S-A-B-R-E. Issue number 13, entitled Day of the Dragon Lord. So you would think it'd be Deadly Reunion based on the cover here. We have Master Luke. This time, we don't dare let the Wookiee win, because it looks like Chewie is beating up what's supposed to look like Luke, but really doesn't look like Mark Hamill has ever looked probably in his life, who is also grabbing C-3PO and so forth. Friend against friend on a star-lost world. Deadly Reunion. Issue number 14, something that... It's a kind of cover that could really only come from either one of those 1990s ones where they're adding holographic stuff in the background, or a 1970s acid trip. Issue number 14, The Sound of Armageddon. And finally, the last issue in the arc, number 15, Star Duel. At last, Han Solo's showdown with Crimson Jack, and this time, it's not really misleading at all. So essentially what we have here is Luke wound up on Drexel. And it's this water world for the most part, and there is this technology that is essentially screwing up any ships that come near and causing them to crash. And then there is this society made up of people who were essentially using the technology that they found. They exiled part of the individuals from the society who wind up becoming the so-called Dragon Lords. They use the technology that they have, this sonic type stuff, to be able to control these huge sea serpents, dragons in this case. And now there's a conflict going on between Governor Quarg and his people and the Dragon Lords. And Luke and the droids and eventually Han, Leia, and Chewie get caught in the middle of all of this. Han and Chewie have left Aduba 3. They wind up running into Crimson Jack yet again, and he hijacks them yet again. Yes, bad luck for these guys. Not only are they being hijacked a second time, not only is it by the same person, but this is the person that is wearing essentially space speedos, which you really don't want to see very often. Turns out, though, he has caught Leia. Remember, Leia took off looking for Luke, and we never really saw what became of her in the previous arc. She was captured by Crimson Jack, and thanks to information that she provides to Han, they're able to sort of con Crimson Jack into going to Drexel to save Luke, who has, of course, crash-landed there, and is kind of caught into that mess. Eventually, they wind up in this sort of three-way battle going, sort of, where Luke is there with Quarg's people, but wanting to get away from them, and you've got Han and the others who are with Crimson Jack's people and trying to get away from them, and yet at the same time, they're all trying not to die in the big mess that's going on. Until finally, they're able to defeat the Dragon Lords, defeat Quarg's people, they escape, only to find out when they get to the last issue of this, 15, that, oh yes, Crimson Jack is still in orbit, and rather than trying to get away from him, it's time for some actual payback. Classic Han Solo rogue-type stuff. He winds up facing off with Crimson Jack. What we wind up getting is a crazy battle in space. If you look at this, you might notice something is missing. Spacesuits! Hello, they should be dead. The idea is that the ships produce a field, a gravitational field or whatever it is, but it produces a field around it that allows them to somehow still survive in space without suits. So you got this really crazy star duel, this zero-gravity space blaster duel between Han and Crimson Jack that winds up turning out fairly well. And by the time it's all over with, thanks to Jolie, this woman who seemed to be Superman-hating until she talked to Leia, and all of a sudden she kind of thinks men are kind of neat. Very flimsy character development for this character, but this woman on Crimson Jack's crew winds up stepping in whenever Crimson Jack seems like he's just sort of throwing her away as a used piece of equipment, so to speak. She finally steps in and enables Han to be able to defeat Crimson Jack, enables them to escape. Our heroes are together again and leaving the scene as Crimson Jack is soundly defeated and El Dead O Grande. I'm pretty sure that's not how they say it south of the border. Just saying. He's dead. He's gone. Crimson Jack cannot return, in theory. But then again, this is a comic book. Now, a few things of note here. This is the first set of comic issues to put together the long-running combination of Archie Goodwin, who will also be a writer for the newspaper strips, and Carmine Infantino, if I'm saying that name correctly. They'll be some of the longest-running writer-artists on this particular series. It's also, many people forget, inked by Terry Austin. The same Terry Austin who will eventually script out and do the inks for the Splinter of the Mind's Eye comic adaptation that was referenced back in the previous episode when we were talking about the Splinter of the Mind's Eye novelization, or novel, excuse me. Now, other stuff of interest. We have one of our first scenes actually depicting Old Republic era Jedi Knights in this. When talking about the background of what happened here, we have the, talking about what happened to this particular planet. He mentions there, and lust for even more of those prophets led to development of more powerful and effective jammers, but the influx of special equipment and technicians needed to accomplish this in time attracted other interest from the Republic and its Jedi Knights. And we get a little Jedi Knight here with a, like kind of a purplish red lightsaber, at least in the recolored classic Star Wars, Star Wars Omnibus a long time ago, Volume 1 that collects these issues. So we get a flashback that basically includes one of our first glimpses at Old Republic Jedi. We also wind up with that contradiction. Remember, in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Leia couldn't swim, Luke could. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Think Alderaan, Tatooine, should be the other way around. They used the logic that actually made sense and referred in these issues to Luke being unable to swim. Now, while that may be logically consistent with Tatooine, that also gives us our first early EU direct contradiction thing. At least though these guys have an excuse. In this era, before the official continuity launched in 1991 with Heir to the Empire, there was no intention, at least no direct intention, that all Star Wars Expanded Universe materials, that term didn't even exist, all Star Wars licensed spin-offs, would be meant to fit together. The comic series was meant to fit together with itself. The novels with themselves, not necessarily the two together. So in that sense, it's a contradiction, but not a contradiction that was a big deal from a continuity standpoint at the time because there wasn't one continuity. But oh, it blew up the letters pages in later issues of the Marvel comic series, which is kind of cool to see that, you know, back then, Star Wars fans were kind of obsessed about continuity just as we tend to be these days. Not a whole lot need be said about Marvel issues 11 through 15 here, but of course we have our two big questions. Is it an essential read, and can it be skipped? I would say that this is definitely not an essential read by any means, because it doesn't really affect a lot in the broader expanded universe stuff, but if you've read the previous story arc from the Marvel series, you might as well continue reading, and this is a nice continuation and conclusion to that. Otherwise you won't know what happened to Luke and Leia, nor what happens to Han and Chewie as they leave Aduba 3. Is it something you can skip? Oh, absolutely. But again, from a Marvel series standpoint, no, you can't skip it. You need to know what happens to these characters after the previous arc to be able to see them going into the next arc. So, skippable if you're not a Marvel reader. If you are a Marvel reader, it is an essential read, and it's not skippable. Really just depends on what type of reader, what type of fan you happen to be. So with that, we'll wrap up this time around. As always, thank you for watching this episode of From the Star Wars Library, and may the Force be with the readers.